Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So it's good to be home. Hey, thank you for the kind welcome, and thank you for the kind invitation to come and deliver a Dvar Torah on this morning. So I understand that Rabbi Bregman's presentation yesterday on Rwanda, that it was nearly 1 hour long. That reminded me of a story about another rabbi who delivered a similarly lengthy address. As soon as he finished, the president of the shul walks up to the rabbi and tells him that since he is a newspaper editor, he can assure the rabbi that the sermon would make it into print. However, he would have to reduce it to the written equivalent of half the time to deliver it. "No problem," says the rabbi. "I will reduce it to fit." And so he does. And this article appears, and another member of the shul board, who's a TV producer, invites the rabbi to deliver it on the air, but he only has a 5-minute spot. "No problem," says the rabbi. "I can reduce it to fit the time slot." And so he does. And at the end of the TV show, the producer says to the rabbi, "That was a wonderful sermon, so beautifully written and delivered, but tell me something, please. If you could reduce it to fit the article and the TV spot, why did you waste 55 minutes of our precious Shabbat sleep time?" So nobody's planning to drift off during my sermon, right? I know everybody plans to follow every single word. Sermons, they are an interesting phenomenon because they demand, actually, that we just sit for an extended period of time and just listen. There's no texting our friends. There's no checking the score of the Canucks game. Over time, with the additions of current technologies, I'm afraid to say that we have lost the ability to listen effectively, especially to that which we don't care to hear. In our polarized world, we are quite fixed in our ways, and we are closed off to viewpoints that we disagree with. And this is a shame, because we're better off when we open ourselves up to the other. We might even learn from opposing perspectives. So a year can certainly make a big difference. It was last fall that we were immersed in our hard-fought Canadian election campaign, and many of us found ourselves sitting in opposing camps. There were tense moments as we eternally weighed competing mandates. A year later, for the most part, this intensity has now passed. And now, interestingly enough, we find ourselves in the role of observers of the campaign that just concluded down south. As outsiders, it is easier for us to look critically at the modern-day process of electing a leader. We pride ourselves in our commitment to democracy. In our free society, we have the privilege to vote, and thereby we have a concrete say in our vision of social order. This is a beautiful ideal. Even more impressive is when various concepts integrate into one policy statement, potentially even including many minority views. After all, the leader of a country is there for all his or her citizens, not just the ones who voted for the successful party. And a true leader recognizes that one can even learn from opposing views. But this is unfortunately countercultural, and it does not represent our present-day reality. We live in a black or white world. You are either with me or you are against me. We erect walls, be they physical or virtual, and we block out that which we don't like. Curiously, we even have a tendency to choose news channels that cater to the viewpoints that we agree with. It is as if we are entirely afraid of encountering the other. After all, if we listen to their words, they might even modify our own opinions. I am still trying to process the results last week of the American election results. I am only sure of one thing. Nobody is listening to each other. We just read the important Torah narrative of the binding of Isaac, and it would appear that Abraham is a man of our time. He could have worked on his listening skills. This would have been a very different story if he would have been sensitive to the needs of his son rather than exclusively following God's decree. Let's take a close look. God calls to Abraham and he affirms, Hineni, here I am. Paraphrasing, he affirms, I am ready, God, for whatever you need. God asks Abraham to take his son Isaac and to climb Mount Moriah, and there he is called to offer him as a human sacrifice. And seemingly without hesitation, Abraham listens and follows God's instructions. He is so immersed in God's expectations that he loses the sense of his commitment to his family. While climbing the mountain, Isaac calls to his father, and again he declares, Hineni, here I am. He claims to be responding to the needs of his son, but his actions, they don't back up his words. And just like us, Abraham finds himself making a definitive choice, and Isaac loses out in this predicament. And Abraham misses an opportunity to bridge the gap between parent and child. Isaac elaborates, here is the firestone and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham explains, God will see to the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. We witness here an example of words not matching intentions. Neither Abraham nor Isaac is really listening. Because what are they trying to say? Isaac is implying, Dad, what exactly is going on here? And Abraham is committed to his word, suggesting, there is a ram present. It is you, Isaac. Interestingly, the trope signs of this phrase affirm Abraham's resignation, as in God has provided my son as the lamb for the burnt offering. Let us imagine this narrative playing out differently. What if Abraham opened himself up to a conversation with God? We know he is capable of this. The two had a healthy conversation when God told Abraham about the plans to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And what if Abraham communicated with Isaac? At least they would start to understand each other's viewpoints. It pains me to read the closing of this narrative. The father-son relationship is destroyed as the two walk in separate directions. Did Abraham pass the test? If this grade were based on listening, I would give him a C-. But there is a much more important test. How does Abraham live in a paradox similar to our own? How does he master opposing calls? It is this test that he fails miserably, and we cannot afford to follow his lead. Instead, we can learn from his experience. Tension can be fruitful if strategically approached. I was reminded of this principle recently while reading an Israeli newspaper. A provocative title in the Times of Israel caught my eye. In Israel, many Israeli athletes must choose between sports and spirituality. The article expands that a new grassroots organization made up of parents and athletes called Nivheret HaShabbat, Shabbat Varsity, is pushing for sporting tournaments to be banned on Shabbat. The problem? The Israeli weekend is only one day long, that being Shabbat. And needless to say, it's most convenient for matches to be held on Saturday, when students are not in school and parents are not at work. But this excludes religiously observant children. As a Reform rabbi, my stance on this topic is very complicated. My visceral reaction? How dare the Orthodox once again tell me what I can and cannot do on Shabbat? However, Once I opened myself up to the concerns of these innocent athletes, I realized this is not the same issue as the orthodoxy demanding a monopoly on the Western Wall or the use of the mikveh. And just as I feel terribly alienated with these attacks on pluralism, in this case, our Orthodox friends are also feeling excluded from organized sport. What a different world it would look like if opposing parties could navigate a pathway to play soccer or baseball with each other in a mutually agreeable manner. Alas, we are too fixed on our own spectrum. There's an appropriate Hasidic lesson that speaks to this topic. There was once a Hasidic master who was walking along a cobbled street in Eastern Europe 200 years ago when he heard the cry of a baby from his student's home. This was a cry that pierced the night. He rushed into the home. He saw his student enraptured in prayer, swaying in pious devotion. And the rabbi walked to the baby, took her into his arms, sat down, and rocked her to sleep. And when the student emerged from his prayers, he was shocked and embarrassed to see his teacher holding his baby. "Master," he said, "what are you doing? Why are you here?" And the master responded, "I was walking in the street and I heard crying." And he responded, "So I followed and I found this baby all alone." "Master," the student replied, "I was so engrossed in my prayer that I did not hear." And the master replied, "My dear student, if praying makes one deaf to the cries of a child, there is something flawed in prayer." The student is so focused on his exclusive call to follow God's word that he is oblivious to the needs of his daughter. And Abraham is similarly obsessed, blind to the pressing call of his son. And many of us are also stuck in our ways. We are unable to recognize the cries that are before us. The holidays have just passed. And at this season of new beginnings, we are called to listen carefully to the voices that are all around us. And I'm not just referring to opposing political parties. We cannot be blind to the immigrant, to the Aboriginal, to the Black Canadian, to the impoverished. And as we open ourselves up to the stories beyond our own, together we enable ourselves to step forward. Our blinders, they keep us focused on the here and now. It's just about winning the game. It would be better for us to look beyond, to the long-term impact of our actions. Let us put down our smartphones, and in fact, let's even turn off the news. More importantly, let's get away from our preconceptions, the obstacles that get in our way. Let us focus our attention on listening and on working together. Even when we don't always like what we hear, let us find space to integrate these words of opposition. I know this will be jarring. This will be uncomfortable. It'll also be inspiring. It'll be unifying. It'll be beautiful. Ken Yehi L'Ratzon.
Thank you, Rabbi Mikelberg. Inspiring. Thank you very much. Our service